The wind howled across the barren plains of Epsilon 7, carrying with it a fine dust that clung to everything it touched. The sky above was an eerie shade of orange, streaked with clouds that seemed permanently locked in place. It was a world dying under the weight of its own despair, and for the small group of humans huddled in the ruins of what was once their colony, it felt like the end of days. Jack Harper stood at the edge of the crumbling wall, his rifle slung over his shoulder as he scanned the horizon. His eyes darted from one shadowy outline to another, searching for any sign of movement. The Vrika were out there somewhere, always watching, always waiting. They had been relentless since they first arrived months ago, attacking without mercy or reason. Now they had surrounded the last human stronghold, cutting off all escape routes and leaving the survivors trapped. Behind him, Rachel Monroe knelt beside a makeshift table, sorting through the meager supplies they had left. Her hands moved methodically, counting ration packs and bandages with a precision born of necessity. She didn't look up when Jack shifted his position slightly, but she could feel the tension radiating off him. Everyone felt it now, the suffocating sense that time was running out. "We're not going to last much longer," Daniel Carter said suddenly, breaking the silence. He was young, barely 22, with wide eyes that still held traces of innocence despite everything he'd seen. His voice trembled as he spoke, betraying the fear he tried so hard to hide. "They've got us boxed in. We're out of food, out of ammo, and no one's coming to save us." Jack turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Someone will come," he said firmly, though even he wasn't sure if he believed it anymore. "Earth hasn't forgotten about us." Daniel snorted bitterly. "Yeah, right. If Earth cared, they would have sent help months ago. Face it, Jack, we're on our own." Rachel glanced up sharply, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Stop talking like that," she snapped. "We don't have the luxury of giving up. Not yet." The argument might have escalated further, but a sudden rumble in the distance silenced everyone. All heads turned toward the source of the noise, a massive explosion that lit up the horizon like a second sun. The ground shook beneath their feet, sending loose rocks tumbling down the side of the ruined wall. "What the hell was that?" Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible over the ringing in their ears. Jack raised his binoculars, scanning the area where the blast had occurred. Through the haze of smoke and dust, he could make out flashes of light weapons fire. The Vrika were moving again, advancing closer with every passing second. Their metallic forms gleamed ominously in the fading light, each step bringing them nearer to the fragile barrier that separated life from death. "They're testing us," Jack muttered grimly, "trying to see how far we'll push back before we break. And when we do?" Rachel asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the approaching army. He hesitated, unwilling to put their worst fears into words. But the truth hung heavy in the air between them. When the defenses fell, there would be no mercy. The Vrika didn't take prisoners, they didn't negotiate. They destroyed everything in their path until nothing remained. For a moment, none of them spoke. The only sounds were the distant echoes of battle and the soft rustle of wind whipping through the ruins. Then Rachel stood up abruptly, brushing dirt from her hands. "We need to reinforce the perimeter," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "If they breach the wall, we're done." Jack nodded, already moving toward the armory. "I'll grab whatever weapons we have left. You two start organizing the others." As he disappeared into the shadows, Rachel turned to Daniel, who was staring blankly at the ground. "Hey," she said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Snap out of it. We need you focused." He blinked, looking up at her with haunted eyes. "What's the point? We're just delaying the inevitable." "Maybe," she admitted, "but every second counts. Every life matters. So stop feeling sorry for yourself and get to work." Her words stung, but they also ignited something within him, a flicker of determination buried deep beneath layers of fear and exhaustion. Slowly, He nodded and followed her toward the center of the compound, where the remaining survivors were gathering. Inside the main hall, chaos reigned. People rushed back and forth, shouting orders and scrambling to gather supplies. A few children clung to their parents, tears streaming down their faces as the reality of their situation sank in. Others sat in silence, their expressions vacant. As though they'd already accepted their fate, Rachel took charge immediately, barking commands with an authority that surprised even herself. She directed some to reinforce the walls, others to distribute weapons, and a handful to tend to the wounded. Despite the overwhelming odds, she refused to let despair take hold. If they were going down, they would go down fighting. Meanwhile, Jack returned with an assortment of rifles and ammunition, dumping them onto the floor in front of the volunteers. "Take what you can carry," he instructed. "And remember, aim for the joints. That's their weak spot." As the preparations continued, a faint beeping sound caught Rachel's attention. At first, she thought it was just another malfunctioning piece of equipment, but then she realized it was coming from the communications console. Frowning, she approached the device and began fiddling with the controls. "What are you doing?" Daniel asked, leaning over her shoulder. "There's something here," she replied, her fingers flying over the keys. "A signal. I think it's from space." His eyes widened. "From Earth? I don't know yet. Let me see if I can decode it." Minutes ticked by as she worked, the tension in the room growing thicker with each passing second. Finally, the static cleared, and a garbled voice crackled through the speakers. "Captain Lara Hayes, UNSC Vanguard, en route." Rachel froze, her heart pounding in her chest. Could it really be true? Was someone actually coming to help them? She replayed the message several times, trying to decipher more details. But it was too fragmented. Still, the implications were clear enough. Someone, possibly Earth, was aware of their plight and was sending reinforcements. "This changes everything," she murmured, turning to share the news with Jack. But before she could speak, a deafening roar split the air, shaking the entire building. Outside, the Vrika had launched another assault, their mechanical form surging forward like a tidal wave of destruction. The defenders scrambled to their positions, bracing for impact. Jack met Rachel's gaze, his expression grim, but resolute. "Tell me later," he said, gripping his rifle tightly. "Right now we've got company." And with that, the battle began anew. Bullets flew, explosions rocked the ground, and screams filled the air as humanity made its final stand against an enemy that seemed unstoppable. Yet amidst the chaos, a tiny spark of hope burned bright, the possibility that salvation might still arrive before it was too late. But for now, survival was the only thing that mattered. The battle raged on, a relentless storm of fire and fury that seemed to stretch endlessly into the night. The defenders fought with everything they had, but it wasn't enough. Wave after wave of Vrika poured through the breaches in the walls, their metallic bodies gleaming under the orange glow of Epsilon 7's dimming sun. Each step they took was deliberate, calculated, as though they knew victory was already theirs. Jack Harper ducked behind a crumbling pillar, reloading his rifle with shaking hands. His breathing came in short, ragged gasps, and sweat dripped down his face despite the cold wind biting at his skin. He glanced around quickly, assessing the situation. The defenders were falling back, retreating toward the underground bunker where the remaining survivors had taken refuge. It was their last line of defense. If the Vrika broke through there, it would be over. "Fall back!" Jack shouted, waving his arm to signal the others. "To the bunker!" Rachel Monroe heard his voice and turned, her own rifle slung over her shoulder as she helped a wounded man limp toward safety. Blood stained her hands and clothes, but she didn't stop moving. There was no time to think about the cost of failure, only the need to keep going. To survive for one more minute, one more hour. Behind them, the Vrika advanced steadily, their weapons firing bursts of energy that tore through walls and flesh alike. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. Screams echoed through the ruins, blending with the deafening roar of explosions. It was chaos, pure and unrelenting. As they reached the entrance to the bunker, Rachel paused, looking back toward the battlefield. Her heart clenched painfully as she saw Daniel Carter still out there, crouched behind a pile of rubble. He was firing wildly, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. She hesitated, torn between staying safe and risking everything to help him. "Rachel!" Jack called sharply, grabbing her arm and pulling her inside. "We can't wait any longer." She let him drag her into the bunker, but her eyes stayed locked on Daniel until the heavy door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the sounds of battle. Inside, the air was damp and musty, lit only by flickering emergency lights. Survivors huddled together, some crying softly, others staring blankly into space. The atmosphere was suffocating, heavy with fear and exhaustion. "We need to barricade." "The door," Jack said immediately, motioning for a group of volunteers to help him. They worked quickly, stacking crates and debris against the entrance in a desperate attempt to slow the Vrika down if they managed to break through. Rachel moved among the survivors, tending to the wounded as best she could. Supplies were running dangerously low, and many of the injuries were beyond her ability to treat. Still, she did what she could, offering words of comfort even when medicine failed. "Hold on," she whispered to a young woman clutching her side, blood seeping through her fingers. "Just hold on." But not everyone was willing to sit quietly and wait for death. In a corner of the bunker, Daniel sat hunched over the communications console, his hands flying furiously over the keys. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. But he refused to give up. The message from earlier, the one Rachel had intercepted, was still playing in his mind. Fragments of static-filled voices repeated themselves like a broken record. "Captain Lavra Hayes, UNSC Vanguard, en route." "They're coming," he muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the hum of the equipment. "They have to be. What are you doing?" Rachel asked, approaching him cautiously. She knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You should rest. You've been through enough." "I can't," he replied, shaking his head. "I need to figure out where they are. If they're really coming, we need to know." Rachel hesitated, then nodded. She understood his desperation. Hope was a fragile thing, but it was all they had left. Together, they worked tirelessly, trying to decode the fragmented transmission. Hours passed, each one feeling longer than the last. The tension in the bunker grew thicker, pressing down on everyone like an invisible weight. Finally, just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them, Daniel let out a triumphant shout. "I got it," he exclaimed, pointing at the screen. "It's clear now, listen." He played the message again, this time without the interference. The voice was calm but urgent, speaking with authority. "This is Captain Lavra Hayes of the UNSC Vanguard. We have received your distress signal and are en route to your location. Hold on, help is coming." A collective gasp rippled through the bunker as the survivors gathered around to hear the news. For the first time in months, hope flickered too. Life, fragile but undeniable. Some began to cry, tears of relief mingling with those of despair. Others simply stared in stunned silence, unable to believe what they were hearing. "Is it real?" Someone whispered, "Could it actually be true?" "It has to be," Rachel said firmly, though her own voice trembled slightly. Why else would someone send that message? Jack stood nearby, listening intently. Part of him wanted to believe it, to let himself feel the smallest shred of optimism. But skepticism gnawed at him, whispering doubts that he couldn't ignore. Earth hadn't sent reinforcements in years, not since the colonies became too costly to maintain. What made this time different? Before he could voice his concerns, the ground shook violently, throwing everyone off balance. The sound of pounding. Footsteps echoed above them, followed by the unmistakable whine of Vrika weaponry. The invaders had found the bunker. They're here. Someone screamed, panic spreading like wildfire. Jack sprang into action, barking orders to fortify their position. "Get ready," he shouted. "They'll try to breach the door. We need to hold them off." The defenders scrambled to prepare, taking up positions near the entrance. Rifles were loaded, makeshift barriers were reinforced, and every available weapon was distributed. The tension was palpable, a living thing that filled the air and pressed down on their chests. Rachel moved among the defenders, handing out ammunition and offering quiet words of encouragement. She stopped beside Jack, her expression grim but determined. "If this is it," she said softly, "we go down fighting." He met her gaze, nodding once. Agreed. For several agonizing minutes, nothing happened. The pounding ceased and an eerie silence settled over the bunker. It was almost worse than the noise, leaving everyone on edge, waiting for the inevitable attack. Then, without warning, the door exploded inward, sending shards of metal and debris flying in all directions. Vrika surged forward, their weapons blazing. The defenders opened fire, creating a chaotic crossfire that illuminated the cramped space with flashes of light. Bullets ricocheted off the walls, and screams filled the air as both humans and aliens fell. Amidst the chaos, Rachel spotted Daniel, huddled near the communications console, clutching a pistol he barely knew how to use. She grabbed his arm and pulled him behind a makeshift barricade. "Stay here," she ordered. "Don't move unless I tell you to." "But," he started to protest, but she cut him off with a sharp look. "No arguments, just stay alive." As the battle raged on, the survivors fought with a ferocity born of desperation. Every shot fired, every blow struck, was fueled by the knowledge that this might be their final stand. Yet amidst the carnage, a glimmer of hope remained, the belief that help was on the way, that salvation might yet arrive before it was too late. And then, just as the defenders began to falter, a new sound pierced the din, a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to shake the very foundation of the planet. The Vrika froze, their heads tilting upward as though sensing something unfamiliar in the sky. "What is that?" Rachel whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and awe. Jack didn't answer. He was too busy staring at the ceiling, his jaw clenched tightly as the rumbling grew louder. Whatever it was big and it was close. Moments later, the ground shook violently once more, and a brilliant flash of light illuminated the horizon. The Vrika let out a series of high-pitched screeches, their attention diverted from the bunker as they turned toward the source of the disturbance. "It's them," Daniel breathed, his eyes wide with disbelief. "They're here." The defenders exchanged stunned glances, their hearts pounding with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Could it really be true? Had the warship from Earth finally arrived? As the realization sank in, a renewed sense of determination swept through the bunker. The Vrika were distracted, their forces scattered. Now was their chance to strike back, to reclaim some semblance of control over their fate. "Let's finish this," Jack said, raising his rifle. "For Earth!" With a fierce cry, the defenders surged forward, driving the Vrika back and reclaiming the entrance to the bunker. Outside, the sky was alight with explosions as the UNC Vanguard unleashed its full arsenal upon the alien fleet. The tide of the battle had shifted, but the fight was far from over, for now, though hope burned brighter than ever, lighting the way forward even in the darkest of times. The sky above Epsilon 7 was a canvas of fire and destruction. Massive beams of energy tore through the atmosphere, scattering debris and ash in their wake. The UNC Vanguard loomed overhead, its sleek hull glinting ominously as it unleashed wave after wave of devastating attacks against the Vrika fleet. Explosions rippled across the heavens, each one a testament to Earth's power and resolve. Inside the bunker, the survivors watched in stunned silence as the battle unfolded above them. For months, they had fought alone, clinging to life by the thinnest of threads. Now, salvation seemed to descend from the stars themselves, shattering the void that had once felt so unyielding. The weight of hope pressed heavily on their chests, mingling with disbelief and cautious optimism. "They're really here," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling as she stared out of a cracked viewport. Her hands gripped the edge of the frame tightly, knuckles white from the strain. They actually came. Jack stood beside her, his rifle slung over his shoulder as he surveyed the scene outside. His expression was unreadable, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of relief. "Don't get your hopes up too high yet," he said quietly. "This isn't over." He was right. Despite the arrival of the vanguard, the Vrika were far from defeated. Their forces regrouped quickly, adapting to the sudden onslaught with terrifying efficiency. Metallic forms darted between burning wreckage, firing bursts of energy at the warship while simultaneously launching counterattacks against the human defenders below. "We need to hold our ground," Jack continued, turning to address the others. "If we can keep the Vrika distracted down here, the vanguard might have a better chance of taking them out." Rachel nodded, her mind racing. She knew what he meant. Their survival depended not just on the warship, but also on their ability to fight back. Every second counted, every action mattered. Failure wasn't an option. As if on cue, the sound of heavy boots echoed through the corridor leading into the bunker. A squad of soldiers clad in Earth-standard combat gear appeared, their faces grim but resolute. At their head was Lieutenant Ryan Mitchell, a tall man with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. His uniform was scorched in places, evidence of the fierce fighting he and his team had endured to reach the survivors. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he introduced himself curtly, saluting Jack before addressing the group. "We're here to extract you. The captain wants everyone aboard the Vanguard, ASAP." Murmurs spread among the survivors, some expressing gratitude while others voiced skepticism. After months of isolation and betrayal, trust didn't come easily. "Why should we believe you?" Daniel asked bitterly, stepping forward despite Rachel's attempts to pull him back. "How do we know this isn't another trick?" Ryan's gaze hardened, but there was no anger in his tone, only understanding. "I don't blame you for being cautious," he admitted. "But I promise you, we're not leaving without you." Captain Hayes gave orders to bring every last survivor aboard. The mention of Captain Hayes seemed to calm the crowd slightly. There was something reassuring about hearing her name, a reminder that Earth hadn't forgotten them entirely. Still, doubts lingered. What about the Vrika? Jack asked, cutting straight to the point. "Even with the Vanguard here, they're not going anywhere. We can't just run and leave this planet behind." Ryan hesitated, glancing toward the viewport where flashes of light illuminated the battlefield beyond. "You're right," he said finally. "The Vrika won't give up easily. That's why the captain has a plan, but it requires cooperation from all of you." "A plan?" Rachel interjected, stepping closer. "What kind of plan?" Ryan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his sweat-drenched hair. "The Vanguard can't stay in orbit forever. We've taken heavy damage during the initial assault, and our resources are limited. If we want to end this, we need to take out the Vrika mothership, the source of their command structure. Without it, their forces will collapse." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Taking down the mothership sounded impossible, especially given how outnumbered and outgunned they were. Yet, deep down, the survivors understood there was no other choice. It was either risk everything or face certain doom. "How do you expect us to do that?" Jack demanded, crossing his arms. "We barely survived long enough for you to show up. What makes you think we can pull off something like this?" "It's not just you," Ryan replied firmly. "My team will lead the operation. You'll provide Support knowledge of the terrain, intel on the Vrika tactics, anything you've learned during your time here. Together, we stand a chance. Rachel exchanged a glance with Jack, silently weighing the risks. They both knew what was at stake. Failure would mean death for everyone. But success could change everything. All right, Jack said finally, nodding slowly. We're in. Relief washed over Ryan's face, though it was fleeting. He turned to address the rest of the group, explaining the details of the plan. We'll split into teams. Most of you will evacuate to the rendezvous point near the eastern ridge, where shuttles from the Vanguard will pick you up. A smaller team including myself, Harper, Monroe, and a few volunteers will infiltrate the Vrika mothership and disable its shields. Once that's done, the Vanguard will deliver the final blow. Voices erupted around the room, a mix of fear and determination. Some argued against splitting up, while others volunteered immediately, eager to contribute however they could. In the end, a small group emerged, ready to join the infiltration mission. Among them was Daniel, who refused to back down despite Rachel's protests. I'm not sitting this one out, he insisted, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. I started decoding those signals. This is my fight too. Rachel wanted to argue, to remind him how dangerous the mission would be. But she saw the fire in his eyes, the same determination that had driven her to keep going when all hope seemed lost. Reluctantly, she nodded. Just stay close to me, she said softly. Promise me that. I promise, Daniel replied, gripping his pistol tightly. With the plan set, preparations began in earnest. Weapons were distributed, supplies packed, and strategies reviewed repeatedly. Time was of the essence. Every moment spent planning was another moment the Vrika could regroup and retaliate. As the survivors worked, the sounds of battle outside grew louder, a constant reminder of the stakes at the edge of the bunker. Ryan pulled Jack aside for a private conversation. Listen, he said, lowering his voice. I know you've been through hell, and I respect the hell out of what you've done to keep these people alive. But this mission, it's going to be brutal. Worse than anything you've faced so far. Jack met his gaze evenly, unfazed by the warning. Tell me something I don't know. Ryan smirked faintly, though the humor didn't reach his eyes. Fair enough. Just remember, no matter what happens, our priority is disabling those shields. Nothing else matters, not revenge, not glory. Got it? Got it, Jack confirmed, his tone firm. Let's finish this. As the final arrangements were made, the survivors gathered near the entrance to the bunker, preparing to make their move. The air was thick with tension, anticipation, and a strange sense of camaraderie. For the first time in months, they weren't facing the Vrika alone. Earth had returned, and with it came a chance not just to survive, but to reclaim their future. The lieutenant raised a hand, signaling for silence. All right, people, he said, his voice carrying authority. This is it. Stick to the plan, watch each other's backs, and remember why we're doing this. Let's show the Vrika what humans are made of. With that, the doors opened, and the survivors stepped out into the chaos, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Above them, the Vanguard roared triumphantly, its presence a beacon of hope in a world consumed by despair. The battle was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, victory felt possible. The eastern ridge was a jagged scar on the landscape, its rocky outcroppings jutting into the sky like broken teeth. The wind whipped through the narrow paths, carrying with it the acrid smell of burning metal and ash. For the survivors making their way toward the rendezvous point, every step felt heavier than the last. The weight of exhaustion, fear, and uncertainty pressed down on them, but they pushed forward, driven by the faint glimmer of hope that had been reignited by the arrival of the Vanguard. Rachel Monroe led a small group of evacuees, her rifle slung over her shoulder as she scanned the horizon for signs of danger. Behind her, Daniel Carter followed closely, his pistol clutched tightly in trembling hands. Despite his earlier bravado, the reality of their situation was beginning to sink in. Each explosion from the distant battlefield sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through him. But he forced himself to keep moving, repeating Rachel's words in his mind. "Stay close. Keep your heads down," Rachel instructed quietly, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "We don't know if the Vrika are still patrolling this area." The group obeyed without question, hugging the shadows cast by the rocks as they navigated the treacherous terrain. Ahead of them, Lieutenant Ryan Mitchell and Jack Harper moved quickly, clearing the path and ensuring the route remained safe. Their movements were precise, born of years of training and experience, but even they couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. "We're running out of it," Ryan muttered under his breath, glancing at his wrist-mounted chronometer. "If we don't reach the rendezvous soon, the shuttles won't wait." Jack nodded grimly, his eyes darting between the darkened crevices around them. "We'll make it," he said, though whether he was trying to reassure Ryan or himself was unclear. "Just keep moving." As they approached the base of the ridge, the sounds of battle grew louder. The thunderous roar of the vanguard's cannons echoed across the plains, mingling with the high-pitched whine of Vrika weaponry. Explosions lit up the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the desolate landscape. It was a reminder of the chaos unfolding above them, a war being waged on two fronts. "Do you think they'll win?" Daniel asked suddenly, his voice breaking the tense silence. He was looking up at the sky, where streaks of light marked the ongoing dogfight between Earth's warship and the alien fleet. Rachel glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "They have to," she replied simply. "If they don't, none of this matters." Her words hung in the air, unspoken fears lingering between them. They both knew what failure meant, not just for them, but for humanity as a whole. The Vrika weren't just invaders. They were exterminators, determined to wipe out any trace of human life. If the vanguard fell, Earth would lose its foothold in the galaxy, leaving colonies like Epsilon 7 defenseless against future attacks. Ahead, Ryan signaled for the group to stop. He crouched low, motioning for Jack to join him. Together, they peered around a cluster of boulders, searching for any sign of movement. The path ahead was clear, or so it seemed, but caution was paramount. One wrong move could spell disaster. All right, Ryan whispered, turning back to the others. "We're almost there. Just a little farther, and we'll be within range of the shuttles. Stay sharp." The group resumed their journey, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. Each step brought them closer to safety, yet the tension refused to ease. Every shadow seemed to hide an enemy, every sound a potential threat. Even the wind carried whispers that set nerves on edge. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet trembled violently. A deafening boom split the air, followed by a blinding flash of light that illuminated the ridge. The survivors instinctively dropped to the ground, shielding their faces as debris rained down around them. What the hell was that? Jack shouted, scrambling to his feet. Ryan didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where a massive plume of smoke rose into the sky. The silhouette of a Vrika cruiser was visible amidst the flames, its hull ruptured and spilling fire into the void. Moments later, another explosion rocked the battlefield, this one closer to their position. "They're targeting us," Ryan realized aloud, his voice tight with urgency. "The Vrika must have figured out our plan. We need to move now." The group sprang into action, abandoning stealth in favor of speed. They sprinted toward the rendezvous point, their hearts pounding in their chests. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder metallic screeches, and the rhythmic pounding of Vrika footsteps echoing through the night. "We're not going to make it," Daniel cried, panic rising in his voice. "They're too fast." "Yes, we are," Rachel snapped, grabbing his arm and pulling him along. "Don't you dare give up now." Her words spurred him forward, adrenaline overriding fear as he pushed himself harder than ever before. The others followed suit, their legs burning with exertion, but their determination unwavering. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the rendezvous point came into view. A trio of shuttles hovered just above the ground, their engines humming softly as they waited for the survivors. Soldiers stationed nearby waved frantically, urging them to hurry. "Go! Go!" Ryan shouted, ushering the group toward the nearest shuttle. "Get aboard." One by one, the evacuees climbed inside, collapsing onto the seats as relief washed over them. Rachel helped Daniel aboard, then turned back to check for stragglers. Her eyes locked with Jack's, who stood guard at the entrance, ensuring everyone made it safely. "You're next," he told her firmly. Nodding toward the shuttle dot, she hesitated, torn between staying with him and retreating to safety. But before she could argue, Ryan appeared beside her, gripping her shoulder tightly. "You're needed on the Vanguard," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. "Get aboard." Reluctantly, Rachel obeyed, climbing into the shuttle. Just as the first Vrika units arrived on the scene, energy blasts tore through the air, forcing Jack, Ryan, and the remaining soldiers to take cover behind the rocks. The infiltration team was still incomplete. They couldn't leave yet. Inside the shuttle, Daniel watched anxiously as the battle unfolded outside. His hands clenched the edges of his seat, knuckles white with tension. "Are they going to be okay?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Rachel didn't answer. She stared out the window, her heart pounding as she watched Jack and Ryan exchange fire with the advancing Vrika. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they fought with a ferocity that defied logic. Every shot fired, every grenade thrown was a testament to their refusal to surrender. "Hold on," the pilot announced, his voice calm despite the chaos. "We're lifting off." The shuttle ascended rapidly, carrying the survivors away from the battlefield. Below them, the ridge disappeared into the haze of smoke and fire, leaving only the faint glow of weapons fire visible in the distance. Rachel closed her eyes, silently praying that Jack and the others would survive long enough to complete their mission. Meanwhile, aboard the Vanguard, Captain Lavra Hayes paced the bridge, her face etched with worry. The ship's systems displayed real-time updates of the battle, highlighting the growing number of casualties and the dwindling resources. Yet, amidst the chaos, her focus remained unwavering. "We can't hold them off forever," Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake warned, her fingers flying over the console as she coordinated the ship's defenses. "Their numbers are overwhelming." "No," Lavra replied tersely, stopping to stare at the main view screen. The image of Epsilon 7 filled the display, its surface marred by craters and scars left by the relentless fighting. "But we don't have a choice. Not until the infiltration team disables those shields." Sarah glanced at her captain, noting the fatigue etched into her features. Despite her outward composure, Lavra was struggling, physically, emotionally, mentally. The burden of command weighed heavily on her shoulders, and the knowledge that lives depended on her decisions gnawed at her conscience. "You did the right thing," Sarah said softly, placing a reassuring hand on Laura's arm. "Coming here. Risking everything, it wasn't easy, but it was necessary." Lavra sighed, rubbing her temples as though trying to ward off an impending headache. "I just hope it's enough," she admitted. "For all of us." Back on the surface, Jack and Ryan regrouped with the rest of the infiltration team. Their numbers reduced, but their resolve stronger than ever. The rendezvous point was secure, and the evacuees were en route to the Vanguard. Now it was time to focus on the final phase of the mission. "All right, people," Ryan said, raising his voice to be heard over the din of battle. "This is it. The mothership is less than 5 clicks from here. Once we're inside, we disable the shields and signal the Vanguard. No heroics, no detours. Understood?" A chorus of affirmations answered him, each voice laced with determination. Together, they formed a tight-knit unit, bound by a shared purpose and a desperate desire to see this fight through to the end. As they set off toward the Vrika mothership, the sounds of battle faded into the background, replaced by the steady rhythm of their boots against the unforgiving terrain. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but they pressed on, knowing that failure was not an option. Humanity's survival depended on their success, and they would not falter. The Vrika mothership loomed ahead, a towering monolith of alien design that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Its surface was a patchwork of jagged edges and glowing veins of energy, pulsating faintly as though alive. To Jack Harper and the infiltration team, it was a fortress, a seemingly impenetrable barrier standing between them and their goal. But they had no choice. The fate of Epsilon 7, the Vanguard, and perhaps even Earth itself rested on their ability to breach its defenses. "Stay low," Lieutenant Ryan Mitchell whispered, motioning for the group to crouch behind a cluster of rocks. They were still several hundred meters from the ship's entrance, but already the air was thick with tension. Patrols of Vrika drones swept the area, their metallic forms glinting ominously in the dim light. Every movement the team made had to be precise, every sound minimized. Jack scanned the horizon, his rifle gripped tightly in his hands. His heart pounded in his chest, not just from exertion, but from the weight of what lay ahead. He glanced at Rachel, who knelt beside him, her expression calm despite the chaos surrounding them. Her presence was a steadying force, a reminder that they weren't alone in this fight. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before those drones circle back," Ryan said, checking his chronometer. "We need to move fast." The team nodded silently, each member steeling themselves for the task ahead. One by one, they crept forward, hugging the shadows as they approached the base of the mothership. The entrance was guarded by a pair of massive doors, sealed shut and humming with energy. It was clear that brute force wouldn't be enough to open them. They'd need to find another way inside. "There," Daniel Carter whispered suddenly, pointing toward a narrow maintenance hatch embedded in the side of the structure. It was small, barely large enough for a single person to squeeze through, but it offered a chance. Ryan raised an eyebrow, skeptical but willing to take the risk. "Good eye," he admitted. "Let's check it out." The team moved quickly, reaching the hatch without incident. Jack knelt down, examining the mechanism. It was locked, of course, but the panel covering the controls was loose. With a few careful twists of his knife, he pried it open, revealing a tangle of wires beneath. "You know how to bypass this?" Ryan asked, his tone cautious. Jack hesitated, then nodded. "I think so. Give me a minute." He worked methodically, his fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. After a tense moment, there was a soft click, and the hatch slid open with a hiss of escaping air. The team exchanged relieved glances, though none dared to relax just yet. "After you," Ryan said dryly, gesturing for Jack to lead the way. One by one, they slipped inside, finding themselves in a dimly lit corridor that stretched into darkness. The air was cold and stale, carrying a faint metallic tang that made their skin crawl. Strange symbols adorned the walls, glowing faintly as though watching their every move. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional hum of machinery. "All right," Ryan said quietly, pulling out a handheld scanner. "According to intel, the shield generator is located deep within the ship, probably near the core. We'll need to navigate through multiple levels to reach it." "And avoid getting caught," Rachel added, her voice low but firm. "If they realize we're here, we're dead." "No pressure," Daniel muttered under his breath, earning a sharp glare from Ryan. "Stay focused," the lieutenant snapped. "We don't have time for distractions." The group moved cautiously, sticking to the shadows as they navigated the labyrinthine corridors. At every intersection, they paused, scanning for signs of enemy activity. So far, the path was clear. But they knew it wouldn't last. The Vrika were intelligent, adaptive, and ruthless. They wouldn't leave such a critical part of their ship UNDFEND. After several minutes of careful progress, they reached a wide chamber filled with strange, organic-looking pods. Each pod pulsed rhythmically, emitting a soft glow that illuminated the room. Inside, shadowy figures floated suspended in some kind of liquid, their forms humanoid but distorted, as though halfway between life and death. "What are these?" Rachel whispered, her voice tinged with unease. "Cloning tanks," Ryan replied grimly. "They use them to replenish their forces. If we destroy the mothership, we'll cut off their ability to keep producing troops." "Then let's hurry up and do it," Jack said, his tone sharp. The sight of the pod sent a chill down his spine, a visceral reminder of the enemy they were facing. They pressed on, climbing staircases and navigating narrow passages until they finally reached a heavily fortified door. Unlike the maintenance hatch, this one was imposing, reinforced with layers of metal and shimmering with protective energy fields. A control panel nearby blinked with lights, indicating active security protocols. "This is it," Ryan said, studying the panel carefully. "Shield generator must be on the other side." Jack stepped forward, examining the panel. "It's encrypted," he observed after a moment. "We'll need someone to hack it." Daniel hesitated, then stepped forward. "I can try," he offered, his voice trembling slightly. Despite his earlier bravery, the reality of being so close to the heart of the enemy ship was beginning to weigh on him. "Go ahead," Ryan said, stepping aside. "Just make it quick." Daniel nodded, pulling out a small device and connecting it to the panel. His fingers flew over the keys, lines of code scrolling across the screen as he worked to bypass the encryption. The rest of the team stood guard, weapons at the ready, their eyes darting nervously around the chamber. Seconds felt like hours as the hacking process dragged on. Finally, with a triumphant beep, the door slid open, revealing a massive chamber beyond. In the center of the room stood the shield generator, a towering structure of interlocking plates and glowing conduits. Energy crackled around it, creating a deafening hum that filled the air. "That's our target," Ryan said, pointing toward the generator. "Plant the charges and get out. We don't have much time once we start this." Jack and Rachel moved immediately, setting explosive charges at key points along the generator's base. Their movements were efficient, born of practice and desperation. Meanwhile, Ryan kept watch, his rifle trained on the entrances to the chamber. "How long until detonation?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. 5 minutes, Jack replied, securing the last charge. "Let's move." As they turned to leave, alarms blared throughout the ship, piercing the air with their shrill wail. Red lights flashed overhead, bathing the chamber in an ominous glow. The Vrika had discovered them. "They're coming!" Rachel shouted, raising her rifle as the first wave of enemies poured into the room. The team opened fire, their weapons blazing as they fought to hold off the advancing Vrika. Bullets ricocheted off metallic armor, sparks flying in all directions. The aliens screeched angrily, their movements jerky but relentless. For every Vrika they took down, 2 more appeared, forcing the humans deeper into the chamber. "We can't stay here," Ryan yelled, firing a grenade that exploded in a burst of flames. "Fall back." They retreated toward the exit, fighting tooth and nail to keep the Vrika at bay. Daniel stumbled, nearly dropping his weapon, but Rachel grabbed his arm and pulled him along. "Keep moving," she urged, her voice strained. Behind them, the shield generator began to destabilize, the charges causing cracks to form in its structure. Energy surged wildly, sending arcs of electricity shooting through the air. The entire chamber shook violently, threatening to collapse at any moment. "Go! Go!" Jack shouted, pushing the others ahead of him. "We need to get out of here now." The Teams sprinted through the corridors, retracing their steps as explosions rocked the ship. Walls buckled, debris rained down, and the air grew thick with smoke. Despite the chaos, they pushed forward, driven by sheer willpower and the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. Finally, they reached the maintenance hatch they had entered through earlier. One by one, they climbed out, emerging into the harsh light of Epsilon 7's sky. Behind them, the mothership groaned ominously, its surface cracking as the shield generator collapsed inward. "We did it," Daniel gasped, collapsing to his knees. As the realization hit him, we actually did it. But their victory was short-lived. Above them, the Vanguard descended, its cannons trained on the crippled mothership. Captain Lavra Hayes' voice crackled over their comms. "Mission accomplished. Stand clear, we're finishing this." A massive beam of energy shot from the warship, striking the mothership with devastating force. The alien vessel erupted in a blinding explosion, sending shockwaves rippling across the landscape. The ground shook violently, knocking the team off their feet as the firestorm consumed the remnants of the Vrika fleet. When the dust settled, silence fell over the battlefield. The survivors stared at the wreckage, their chests heaving with exhaustion and relief. They had done the impossible. They had shattered the void that had once seemed unbreakable. For the first time in months, hope felt real. Not just for themselves, but for humanity as a whole. The Vrika were defeated, their grip on Epsilon 7 broken. Now the hard work of rebuilding could begin. But as Jack looked around at his comrades, battered and bruised but alive, he knew one thing for certain. They had proven that even in the darkest of times, resilience and determination could light the way forward. The explosion of the Vrika mothership lit up the sky like a second sun, its fiery remains scattering across Epsilon 7's atmosphere. The shockwave rippled outward, shaking the ground beneath the survivors' feet, and sending clouds of ash swirling into the air. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, suspended in the aftermath of destruction. Then, slowly, the sounds of battle faded, replaced by an eerie silence that felt almost unnatural after months of chaos. Jack Harper sat on the rocky ground, his rifle resting across his knees as he stared at the burning remnants of the alien fleet. His body ached from head to toe, every muscle screaming in protest, but he couldn't bring himself to move. The weight of what they had accomplished and what they had lost pressed down on him, leaving him numb. Beside him, Rachel Monroe knelt, her hands trembling slightly as she tended to a cut on Daniel Carter's arm. Despite the exhaustion etched into her face, she worked with steady hands, her focus unwavering. "You're going to be fine," she murmured, more to herself than to Daniel. Her voice was soft, but it carried a strength that reassured everyone around her. Daniel nodded weakly, though his eyes were distant, still processing everything that had happened. "We made it," he whispered, as if testing the words to see if they were real. "We actually made it." "We did," Jack said finally, his tone heavy with both relief and sorrow. He glanced at the others, their faces streaked with dirt and blood, their expressions a mix of triumph and grief. They had survived, yes, but at what cost? So many lives had been lost, so much suffering endured. The victory felt hollow without those who hadn't made it through. Above them, the UNSC Vanguard hovered protectively, its massive form casting a shadow over the battlefield. Shuttles descended from its belly, landing near the survivors to begin evacuations. Soldiers in Earth-standard combat gear moved quickly, organizing the wounded and ensuring everyone was accounted for. Lieutenant Ryan Mitchell approached the group, his uniform torn and scorched but his posture resolute. "Good work," he said simply, nodding to each of them in turn. "You held it together when it mattered most. We couldn't have done this without you." Jack managed a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Just doing our part," he replied, his voice rough with fatigue. "What happens now?" Ryan hesitated, glancing toward the horizon where the ruins of the colony lay smoldering. "Now we clean up." The captain wants to assess the damage and see if anything can be salvaged. But first, we get you all aboard the Vanguard. You've earned some rest." Rachel stood up, brushing dust from her hands. "And then?" she asked, her gaze fixed on Ryan. "What about Earth? Are they going to send help to rebuild? Or are we just another forgotten outpost?" Ryan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know yet. That's above my pay grade. But I can tell you this. Captain Hayes isn't letting anyone forget what happened here. She's fighting for colonies like this one, making sure Earth doesn't turn its back again." His words offered little comfort, but they were enough for now. The survivors began boarding the shuttles, their movements slow and deliberate. Some limped, others leaned on comrades for support, but none complained. They were alive, and that was something to cling to. As Jack climbed aboard the shuttle, he paused to look back at the desolate landscape one last time. The orange sky was streaked with black smoke, and the ground was littered with debris from the battle. It was a wasteland, a graveyard for dreams and lives alike. Yet, amidst the ruin, there was a flicker of hope, a fragile promise that maybe, just maybe, things could change. Inside the shuttle, Rachel took a seat beside him, her expression unreadable. "You okay?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. Jack shook his head, then nodded, unsure of how to answer. "I don't know," he admitted. "It feels strange. Like we won, but nothing really changed." "That's because it hasn't," Rachel said firmly. "Not yet. This is just the beginning. We survived today, but tomorrow is going to be harder. Rebuilding won't be easy." "I know," Jack replied, leaning back against the wall. "But at least we have a chance now. A real one." The shuttle lifted off, ascending rapidly toward the waiting warship. Below them, Epsilon 7 grew smaller and smaller, its scars fading into the haze of smoke and ash. The survivors watched silently, their thoughts turning inward as they processed everything they had endured. On board the Vanguard, Captain Lavra Hayes stood on the bridge, her hands clasped tightly behind her back as she stared out the viewport. The view of the planet below filled the screen, a stark reminder of humanity's fragility in the vastness of space. She had seen too many colonies fall, too many lives sacrificed for reasons she didn't always understand. But this time she had come. And this time she had fought. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake said softly, approaching her cautiously. "The survivors are aboard. Medical teams are tending to the wounded, and engineering crews are assessing the damage to the ship." Lavra nodded, her expression unreadable. "Good. Make sure they're comfortable. These people have been through hell. They deserve whatever we can give them." Sarah hesitated, then added, "What about the colony? Do you think it can be rebuilt?" Lavra sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly under the weight of the question. "I don't know," she admitted. "It'll take time, resources, and a lot of determination. But I'm not giving up on it, not after what they've been through. Earth owes them that much." Her words were firm, resolute, but they carried a note of sadness. She knew the road ahead would be long and difficult, fraught with challenges that couldn't be solved overnight. Yet, she also knew that failure wasn't an option. Humanity couldn't afford to lose another foothold in the stars, not when the galaxy was filled with threats like the VRYKKA. As the Vanguard prepared to jump into hyperspace, the survivors gathered in the ship's mess hall, sharing quiet conversations and somber reflections. Some cried openly, mourning loved ones lost in the battle. Others sat in silence, staring blankly at the walls as they tried to process everything that had happened. Amidst the grief, however, there was a sense of unity, a shared understanding that they had faced the impossible and emerged victorious. Jack found himself sitting beside Rachel, their shoulders brushing lightly as they leaned against the wall. Neither spoke for a while, content to simply exist in the moment. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. "What do you think happens next?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Jack shrugged, his gaze fixed on the floor. I guess we go back to Earth for now. Try to figure out what comes after this. And then? Rachel pressed, her tone hopeful despite everything. Jack allowed himself a small smile, the first genuine one in what felt like forever. Then we rebuild, not just the colony, but ourselves. We keep fighting for a better future, for the people we lost, for the ones who are still counting on us. Rachel nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. I can live with that. The ship rumbled gently as it entered hyperspace, the stars outside the windows blurring into streaks of light. For the first time in months, the survivors allowed themselves to relax, to believe that perhaps the worst was behind them. They had faced annihilation and emerged stronger, bound together by shared sacrifice and resilience. Their doom had once seemed inevitable, sealed by forces beyond their control. But then, a warship from Earth had shattered the void, bringing with it not just salvation, but a renewed sense of purpose. The journey ahead would be difficult, and the scars of Epsilon 7 would never fully heal. But as long as they had each other, and the unyielding determination to keep moving forward, they knew they could face whatever came next. In the end, that was all that mattered.